ahead and get started, I guess. Because the first couple of minutes aren't very exciting anyway. So we'll wait for a couple more people to trickle in as we get started. So good morning, everybody. Molly Duplashane, Deputy Director of Excise and Licenses. So thanks for being here. This is our second work group meeting to receive recommendations on some rules coming out of the omnibus bill that was passed in April. So quick agenda, I'll quickly go over, just what we went over last time, the purpose and the ground rules, meeting format and the goal, and then we're going to hop into the discussion, and I'll quickly tee up the topic of discussion for today and then pass it over to Abby to Abby first to give some background on state and local rules. And then we have some folks here from Community Planning and Development to talk about zoning requirements for drive-up and walk-up windows. And then we'll jump into some discussion questions for the work group members to provide us some feedback around rules and requirements for drive-up and walk-up windows. So I don't think that we need to necessarily go through this again because we were able to introduce ourselves last time, but I guess we do have a couple of new folks on here that weren't on here last time, mostly from the city. So why don't we go through those real quickly? So I think we have Anna Valdez here from CPD. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Mute.
Oh, there you go. Oh, you might be muted, Anna. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
A newbie on the Zoom. My name is Anna Valdez and I'm a reviewer in the Denver Zoning Department.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we also have Richard from CPD as well. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Good morning, Richard Canoni, Deputy Zoning Administrator with the city.
Great, thank you. And then we also have Melissa from the Office of Children's Affairs who's sitting in for Daniel Reed today. Want to introduce yourself, Melissa?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Yaniszewski. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Youth Development with the Office of Children's Affairs.
Thank you. All right. And everybody else, I think, was here last time. So
Molly,
jump to the next. Oh, yep, go ahead.
James Bauer is sitting in for Tiltmans from Livewell, so I wanted to give him a chance.
Yep.
I'll let it happen, but thank you, Abby. I appreciate it.
All right, go ahead to the next slide. So real quick, just to review the purpose and the ground rules. So this is an advisory group. The purpose is to provide us input and suggestions to aid us in developing the rules for secure storage of marijuana, which we talked about last time, and then the walk-up and drive-through windows. Again, it's advisory in nature. We want to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your subject matter expertise on these two topics. We'll take that input and those recommendations that we get here today, as well as through written comments, to develop some rules around these two topics. Go ahead to the next slide, Abby. Nothing new here other than just how we're gonna work the meeting today, much like we did the last time, where we will provide you some background information. And we'll provide more this time in the fact that we have CPD here to talk about some zoning requirements. But then really we want to spend the most of our time today hearing from you all and your input. And we've developed some discussion questions just to prompt the discussion. They're really just ideas, brainstorming that we started with, but definitely open to hearing more thoughts from the rest of you. As you're speaking today, once we get into the discussion, feel free to just speak up if you have something, or you're welcome to use the raise hand feature as well if you want to get yourself into the conversation. Just try to announce yourself so that for the record, this is being recorded. And so for the record, we can have your affiliation, and then also for the general public that are watching as well, so they know who everybody is. We will have time at the end for public comment. This meeting is open and public and is being viewed on Zoom. And so at the end of the session, we'll open up the time for public comment. Each person will be allowed 2 minutes. And so when we get to that point, we'll just ask any attendees to the meeting that are from the public to use the raise hand feature, and then we'll pull you in to be a panelist and allow you to provide that public comment. Also to the work group members and to the general public, you can provide written comment today or anytime up until the rules are made public, and that can be sent to marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. After today, we'll probably spend some time internally writing the rules, and then what will happen is we will release them publicly, post them, and then we'll schedule a date for a public hearing, at which point there will be another chance for everybody to provide additional public comment and respond to the draft rules that get put out there. And then sometime after that hearing, we will finalize and adopt the rules. So just to tee up quickly the conversation of the day, we're going to be talking about drive-up and walk-up windows. We want to obtain your input on requirements related to safety, security, compliance procedures, and signage for drive-up and walk-up windows at medical and retail marijuana stores. Abby will go over the language that's in ordinance, but that pretty much covers it as far as the areas in which we have the authority to make rules. The purpose of these goals is we want to make sure that adding drive-up and walk-up windows continue with some of the prevention that we have already, the strong prevention techniques and tools that we've put into ordinance and requirements already that help prevent burglaries, prevent diversion of youth to marijuana, and promote safe and secure operations of marijuana businesses. So with that, I will hand it over to Abby to go over some background information.
Thanks, Molly. Again, my name is Abby Borchers. I'm a policy analyst with the Department of Excise and Licenses, and I'm just going to go over some rules that already exist at the state level that the Marijuana Enforcement Division has created, and then we'll talk a little bit about the language that's in Denver's ordinance. This may be information you all already have, but I just want to make sure that everybody is starting with the same knowledge going into this discussion. So the first is the Marijuana Enforcement Division has rules around modifications of premises and what constitutes a material change that requires a modification of premises. You can see here that the creation of a walk-up window or drive-up window, as well as the installation of additional video surveillance can be a material change that requires some modification of premises. And then the MED has rules for walk-up or drive-up windows at both medical marijuana stores and retail marijuana stores. I've only listed the rules for medical because they are pretty similar for retail, with the exception that obviously retail doesn't have requirements around or language around patients. So any marijuana store, but I'm just going to read the medical piece of it. A medical marijuana store can serve patients through a walk-up window or a drive-up window. A modification of premises is required before accepting orders for medical marijuana or transferring medical marijuana through a walk-up or drive-up window. A medical marijuana store has to apply for and get approval of an application for a modification of premises from the state. The area immediately outside the walk-up window or drive-up window has to be under the licensee's possession and control, and it can't include any property such as public streets, public sidewalks, or public parking lots. Prior to accepting an order or transferring medical marijuana to a patient, the employee licensee or owner licensee at the window has to physically view and inspect the patient's identification and registry identification card. The store may accept orders over the internet or telephone, or may accept orders from the patient at the walk-up or drive-up window. All orders received through a walk-up or drive-up window have to be placed by the patient from a menu. The store can't display marijuana products at the window. Cash, credit, debit, cashless ATM, or other payment methods are permitted for payment at a walk-up or drive-up window. For every transfer of marijuana through either a walk-up window or a drive-up window, the store's video surveillance has to enable the recording of the patient's identity and the patient's vehicle in the event of a drive-up window, and has to enable the recording of the licensee verifying the patient's identification, as well as their registry identification card and completion of the transaction through the transfer of the marijuana. Stores using walk-up or drive-up windows have to ensure that all marijuana is packaged and labeled in accordance with the packaging and labeling rules. And then transfers of regulated marijuana using a walk-up window or a drive-up window are subject to requirements and restrictions imposed by the local licensing authority, which is what we're here to talk about today. And vehicles are prohibited in the licensed premises. So a store cannot permit any portion of a vehicle to enter any portion of the licensed premises. So this is Denver's code. In Denver, as part of a modification of premises review, which is what we would require for the addition of a walk-up or drive-up window, the applicant is required to complete any required inspections and receive all necessary permits. That includes, but is not limited to, right-of-way permits, zoning permits, and fire and building permits. So that's reflected in that language there in 6208A. And to address concerns around sustainability and environmental health, these businesses, marijuana businesses with drive-through windows and walk-up windows, will be held to the same public health standards as other similar businesses in Denver and have to be in compliance with all relevant noise, odor, and air pollution mitigation requirements. The language specifically that we're here to talk about today was in the omnibus bill passed back in April, and now it's in the code section 6209A4. All walk-up, drive-up, or curbside pickup services must comply with any applicable zoning, public health, building and fire, transportation, infrastructure, and all other local requirements. Any additional safety, security, compliance procedures, or required signage established by department rule, and any other requirements established by the state licensing authority. So that language there in bold is the basis of our rulemaking authority today. So now I'm going to ask Anna Valdez from zoning to take over.
Thanks, Abby. So I'm just going to run through these pieces of the existing Denver zoning code. So let me know if you have any questions. Generally, the drive-through facilities are permitted as accessory to primary eating and drinking establishments or to retail sales and service and repair. So for marijuana, it would just be the retail sales, whether it's medical or recreational. And because I want to give you all the rules, even if they might not apply to marijuana, drive-through facilities accessory to primary eating and drinking establishments shall comply with the applicable use limitations. In case of conflict, the standards of that section should apply. And the issue that we have usually is that the accessory drive-through facilities have to be sited on the zone lot, constructed, operated, and maintained in compliance with the building form standards allowed in the applicable zone districts and with these use-specific standards. So that just means that we have to make sure that there's circulation and that kind of thing with any drive-through facility. Next slide, please. Any drive-through facility visible from a public street or from a residential zone district shall provide an opaque screening along the visible portion of the drive-through queuing and operating lane. Such screen shall at least meet the requirements for screening found in section 10543, perimeter surface parking lot landscaping standards. All parts of the drive-through facility shall be separate from the parking circulation aisles. Vehicle access to the site shall not unreasonably interfere with automobile or pedestrian traffic. Queuing lanes shall be adequate to prevent backups onto public streets. This subsection's drive-through facility standards apply only to drive-through facilities that commence operations after June 1st, 2006. So that means if we have an existing drive-through facility that was established previously, it may not meet these rules, but it would be allowed to continue as long as the use itself was conforming. Next slide, please. So adjacent to residential zone districts, there shall be no glare from permanent lighting or vehicle headlights projected onto an abutting residential zone lot. To ensure glare is controlled, all external lights shall have fully shielded features. Light trespass onto adjacent residential uses shall not exceed 0.3 foot candles. No device that amplifies sound shall be so designed or operated that the amplified sound exceeds the city's noise ordinance standards on any private property zone lot located within a residential district, zone district beyond the boundaries of the zone lot on which the drive-through facility is operated. Next slide, please. Any drive-through facility located on a zone lot that is adjacent to a residential zone district and has any portion of the facility located 85 feet or less from the residential zone district may only be open during the hours of 5:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 5:30 a.m. to midnight Friday and Saturday. This subsection's drive-through facility standards apply only to drive-through facilities that commence operation after June 1st, 2006. In all zone districts except the S zone district or context, where permitted with limitations when a zone lot is within a quarter mile of a rail transit platform, station platform, accessory drive-through facilities are prohibited. And that's something new that we enacted, I think, a couple years ago to just discourage a lot of drive-through facilities in our transit-oriented development areas. In a suburban context, zone districts were permitted with limitations when a zone lot is within a quarter mile of a rail transit station. An accessory drive-through facility shall only be operated when the primary structure containing the primary use complies with the general or shop front building form standards. So that means you can choose the drive-through form, or you can choose some of the other forms and comply with those. And I'll get to that a little later when we're talking about form standards. But this is just another specific piece of code that's related to these suburban contexts. Okay, so generally speaking, if you already have a drive-through facility, so let's say you're a bank or a liquor store or an eating and drinking establishment, and that use is still allowed, you can continue, or you can ask for a zoning review to establish your own drive-through facility. As long as that drive-through was legally established, abandonment would not affect the use unless the use is no longer allowed in the district. So let's say we had a eating and drinking establishment that was established, let's say in 2005, and then it did not comply with these limitations we're talking about now. Maybe we rezoned it in 2010 to another district that no longer allows that use, then you would not be able to put that drive-through back. Just like any other non-conforming use. Changes to the established site or drive-through configuration could trigger compliance with 1110.8 and other limitations or requirements. So 1110.8 is what we've just been talking about, all those little limitations that are in effect. And also this could also trigger requirements from other disciplines such as transportation or right-of-way, besides the zoning limitations or zoning requirements. Okay, so if we're adding a drive-through to an existing site, again, we have to pick our form. We could use, in some cases, we have the drive-through form available to us. If we don't, or if we choose not to use that, we have to comply with all the form standards, and then the drive-through would just be added to that form. We always have to go through the zoning permit review process. And in some cases, this would require a site development plan process. So that would be a concept plan with an interdisciplinary review. If the drive-through form is not available or not conducive to the project, another form may be utilized. Changes to established site will trigger compliance with limitations and possibly other requirements in the zoning code. So that's kind of what I talked about on the last slide. Applicants should consult a design professional before making an application. Most of these are going to need interdisciplinary review, and we really can't advise you or help you unless we have some good drawings to look at to give you good feedback. Form standards. So any kind of new construction, again, we're going to choose a form, and that's going to kind of dictate how our building is designed. anything like this is going to require a site development plan. Again, that's an interdisciplinary process that is really helpful to help you kind of design your project from beginning to end. And again, compliance with the chosen form standard is really the most important thing. Okay, walk-up windows. A zoning permit is always required for any change like this. This would probably be a change to the facade. If it's on the primary or side street facade, it will need to meet transparency requirements or at least not increase any non-compliance or non-conformity on the existing building. Changes to the established site to accommodate the walk-up will require compliance with general design standards, including pedestrian circulation. So if you wanted to add a walk-up window, we don't want to see pedestrians, walking through, let's say, a drive-through aisle, or we want to look at our whole site and see how the circulation is functioning and whether it's safe and complies with this section.
Okay, thanks, Anna.
Mhm.
That was a lot of information. I think that's really helpful. While it's fresh, does anybody have things off the top of your head about zoning requirements for drive-throughs and walk-ups?
Okay.
It looks like Sally was asking to go for a little bit more detail on the opaque screen requirement. Is there anything you can add to that, Anna?
Garage at their house.
Yeah, so
Operating without-
that's on the parking lot
For a garage,
type thing.
for operating a garage.
Nope, zoning doesn't.
Hold on one second. Hey,
Improper
Brian,
use
it might,
of
it sounds like you might be off mute, Brian.
Because they're never gonna be on a road to compliance because it's not zoned to become a garage. So we don't have a role. So it's a zoning and DPD because we can't ever.
All right, who's off?
Who's off mute?
We don't need to get.
Somebody's off mute.
So then zoning goes out for improper use
It's Brian, right?
of their lot
Oh,
and
right now.
DPD responds.
Yeah.
Because it's resident.
And
they're
then
never
Can't
gonna
find
be-
him.
They're never gonna
Brooke, we
be.
can hear Brooke. Let me text them.
I think all here should be able to mute him.
Yeah, I can't find them. Let's see.
Oh.
Sorry, everybody. Okay. Okay, they should be muted.
Okay, can I get, maybe have the question restated or exactly what the question was?
Yeah. Hey, Anna, thanks for that.
Hi.
Just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more. I know it's a detail, but it was something that didn't make sense to me on what is an opaque screen? What is the opaque screen?
Oh,
And
so
when does-
generally that's going to be a solid wood fence. Sometimes people are able to do some kind of vegetation that will create the opaque screen, but generally we ask for a solid wood fence, solid vinyl fence, something that's completely opaque.
From
as
where to
opposed-
where?
So it's a little convoluted. I understand the question. Let's see, let's go through this. We're talking about visible from a public street or from a residential zone district. So that would be, if you're abutting a residential zone district, the entire length of the drive-through aisle window would need to be screened with a solid fence to protect the residential district. And there are some areas where you also would need to screen the public street. It's kind of hard to visualize without an example.
Okay, I mean, it's more of a personal sort of thing because we do have
Uh-huh.
a dispensary that's on a really busy corner, non-residential, commercially zoned.
Uh-huh.
It used to be an Arby's, so.
Which one is this?
Well, this is in Aurora. I'm just thinking
Oh, okay.
down the line, but
Yeah,
yeah.
no,
so
it would be good to have an example. And
Okay.
that's something, we could maybe go into a little bit more, either offline or at another discussion, but yeah, it's really site specific. So a lot of these sites, it's part of this puzzle that we have to do. And sometimes each site is different, so it's kind of hard to say. But is there one in Denver that you can think of that might be similar to your situation
I don't know.
that I might know?
I'm sure other people, never mind. That was a very
Okay.
nuanced question, and I just wanted to be basic on that.
Well, we can discuss it more if offline, if you'd like to email me or something. Okay.
Thanks, Anna.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So I think for me, I think one thing to just keep in mind too is, and Abby had it in one of the slides at the beginning, was around process, right? And so, I think we can get into this as we talk through some of this, but when we were talking with another person in CPD before, I think one thing she reiterated to us is just to think of adding drive-throughs as a construction and a build out project. And so they will be requiring, I believe, a modification. And so that zone use permit will be a requirement for that as well. So for me, that, always brings into some questions because zoning complicates me. But thank you, Anna, for going through all that. And I'm sure as people go through this process, they'll be reaching out with additional questions.
Okay. Yeah. It's hard. It's difficult. It was difficult for me to sort of put all this stuff in one little bundle, because I think that as this goes forward, we're going to be learning more about how this is going to impact people and learning more about how our processes might need to change or exactly what those processes are. So it'll be a good opportunity for us to look at that. But I've only had two. One I had was an existing drive-through and it was very easy. And it was an old one, so it didn't need to comply with any of the new stuff. And the other one I had totally got killed by transportation because it was a very strange shaped site and it could not meet these screening requirements. And transportation had to tell them they couldn't have all the curb cuts that they currently have. So these are the kinds of things that we can't really anticipate until we see a plan. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. I'm sure there'll be other questions as we go along, but we can hop into the discussion topic now. And I think we can take each question one by one to start with. I'm sure they'll all kind of meld together a little bit, but the first question is just what additional safety precautions should be required at drive-up and walk-up windows to ensure safety and protection of the customer, the store, and the product. So some ideas that we discussed are lighting, hours of operation of just the drive-through, response to intoxicated drivers, any cash handling procedures, or any other ideas that the work group might want to throw out there to address safety of the drive-through window. Throw that open to see if anybody has anything to add.
Yeah, one thing would be like bulletproof windows, things of that nature, because you never know. We've had people try and throw rocks through windows, etc. You start getting into a drive up or a walk up, you want bulletproof for sure, and make it impossible for them to gain access, because that's a way of getting in potentially into your building. So that's a huge one for me, is the bulletproof glass.
I agree with you, Bruce. I think that's really the only, I feel like it's a lot more threatening to have a person with their body free to move around in your store than it is at a drive-through. I feel like that's a much more controllable environment. So while I think safety is important and like you said, Bruce, bulletproof so they can just shut that, easily locked, and then some sort of a pull down door at night so no one can get through. But otherwise, I think it's a lower risk proposition than handling a customer at the counter.
Yeah.
And this is Kevin Gallagher, Apothecary Farms here. My question is, are there any special requirements, security requirements for pharmacy drive-up windows? I'm just trying to think of something that has a greater street value in risk, right? And I wonder if there's any sort of best practices that can be taken from that. And I guess my ask is that we wouldn't go beyond requirements from that, but I completely agree with both Bruce and Sally, right? I think walk-up windows can be secured pretty easily, whether it's bulletproof glass or some sort of security shutter, etc. But you know, it is also a very controlled environment. Thanks.
So good question. I'm not we did look into liquor drive-throughs. I'm not sure if we've looked into pharmacy drive-throughs, but we can look into that. And then there is the language in there that requires these drive-throughs to be in compliance, like, which is why we talked about the zoning and the traffic stuff. But you know, these drive-throughs have to be in compliance with all the other requirements that other types of drive-throughs have to be in compliance with. So, but good point around the pharmacy stuff. We can look into that.
Just another point too is to make sure that there's no opportunity for a would-be criminal to actually like grab somebody by the hand or what have you, and you know, pull out a gun or whatever, and you know, or a knife. I'm going to cut your arm off, or I'm going to shoot you. You know, like banks, they're scrupulous in making sure that there's no touch possibility. And I think that's would augment the bulletproof glass.
Could be something like and again, right, like I think I do agree with Kevin that we should look into the pharmacies and use those best standards and not, you know, go completely overboard to a point where it just becomes this insane thing to build out. But you know, like gas stations where there's this little door that you have to put your card and then they give you the product, like cigarettes, like something along those lines could be helpful.
Yeah.
Or at least for the like outside ones, because I think I can visualize this happening two ways, right? Like a more McDonald's style drive-through and something more like a pharmacy where there's like an enclosed structure. So maybe the requirement should be more for the like McDonald's style open ones. And then for the enclosed ones, the requirements can be on the doors of like being locked instead of the window itself. Molly,
Okay.
also in terms of light, on slide 14, Anna talked about to ensure glare is controlled, all external lights shall have fully shielded fixtures, which I don't even know what they mean, but just whatever we end up with, just, you know, be careful so we are not clashing those two.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. All our drafts will be reviewed by zoning and fire and building and everybody to make sure that we're not requiring something that's not allowed. Okay. Any other input on, and we can come back to this too. I think this one and the next one kind of go a lot together. So the next one is additional security measures to be required at the drive up and walk up windows. So video surveillance, additional vantage points like them that we can make sure we can capture the license plate maybe, and just making sure that the video surveillance, you know, is easily, you know, can identify the customer as well as just kind of get all the different viewpoints, and then securing the window after hours. So Bruce, you know, just talked about bulletproof glass or the thickness of the glass maybe, but making sure any ideas for making, I think Kevin brought up security shutters. So making sure that that window is a secure point of entry after hours, and any other ideas for security measures.
I'm not convinced that we need to capture license plates. I don't really see why that is necessary. Feels a little bit intrusive. You know, we're getting their ID. We're going to have their photo, you know, their picture on the cameras at the drive-through. I'm not sure why we would need to capture a license plate. That seems excessive.
And yep, so maybe, I don't know if Paul Street here from the Denver Police Department might have some thoughts, but we've been out to a couple of different stores recently. We went to one that has a drive-through, and I just continue to be surprised at, and I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, but at the tenacity of people trying to get into marijuana businesses and steal product and things like that. So to me, it's capturing the license plate is not for every single customer, but for the incidents when something happens. And so I agree with you, Sally, that it might seem less scary to have somebody, be in a car, but also it gives them a quicker getaway. And so that might be a way to capture somebody's information if they are coming through and something happens at the drive-through window, whether that be, the unfortunate incident of somebody with a gun or something like that trying to steal some product. So that's, I think, what the idea was around capturing the license plate.
I'd like to
having a
know
video
about the requirement for alcohol or for pharmacy. That would be interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little dubious because I've given license plate numbers and phones of criminals who've dropped them during a robbery and the police have done nothing with it. So no offense, it's totally not Paul. I know Paul would be after him, but I've given tons and tons of information and nothing is done. So it's a burden and an expense to capture that, and then it becomes a compliance risk if something's not working, and to what end? That only question on that.
I
Yeah,
agree with Sally. I think that, we've had situations over here where people have cameras, people are busted breaking into dumpsters, people are busted doing all kinds of things on the marijuana premises, and nothing actually happens. So I think it's a burden on the business owner that's not necessary.
Yeah, Paul Street, Denver PD. I agree with everything everyone's said about this. I think that actual requirement is found in MED rule, not any of the rules that we're discussing implementing here locally. Is that correct, Abby? I thought that was part of the MED rules, capturing the license plate.
This is Ken Gallagher. Sorry to interrupt. I don't think this is part of MED rule.
No.
So the video surveillance, we'll just go back. So video surveillance has to capture the patient's identity and the patient's vehicle. So, it doesn't say license plate, but it does say vehicle. So what does that entail exactly? And then the recording of the licensee verifying the patient's ID, their registry card, and then the completion of the transaction.
So any other ideas or recommendations for how to ensure the safety and security of the drive-up window? And again, just to go back to the general goals and purpose of the requirements that we're trying to achieve is to prevent burglaries and prevent diversion of marijuana to youth, both for the protection of the community, the youth population, and the business and the business itself, and just to promote general safety. So we can move on if there are no other suggestions or responses to the suggestions that have been already put out there.
Can I ask you a question, Molly? How are you guys intending to, like let's say a mother who has a 3-year-old in a car seat in the back, is she going to be allowed to go through a drive-through? And then if the answer is yes, what's the age? What if the kid in the back is 16? What is the spot
So I
there?
don't believe that there are any MED requirements or state requirements for limiting, you know, there's no requirements for checking the ID of everybody in the car or anything like that. It's something that we've talked about. I'm happy to hear suggestions from anybody to see if there's anything. I think a lot of that, you know, is going to be on the business to make sure that they can kind of read the room a little bit, right? What's going on in the car, that type of thing. Just like somebody could be sitting in a car as the 22-year-old walks into the business, you know, and then leaves with the 17-year-old in the car. So I think it's just one of those things that's hard to get to. And so, you know, what we can talk, I think, in the next one about ID requirements. Obviously, getting the ID of the customer is required. Open to suggestions if anybody has any ideas, but it's a very difficult one to address.
So I just want to give a little background on liquor drive-throughs, because that's what we looked at when we were thinking about that ID issue. And basically the answer is that, you know, as a liquor licensee, you're not allowed to sell liquor to anyone under the age of 21. And then the burden is on you to make sure that you don't do that. And that's the way that it works with liquor drive-throughs. Not that marijuana and liquor are the same, but that's just kind of the analogous industry. And then we took a tour of Native Roots' drive-through facility at 500 Grant. And Aaron had some really good thoughts about how they kind of make sure that, you know, that they're not transferring marijuana to anyone who's under 21. So I don't want to put you on the spot, Aaron, but if you want to maybe shed some light on that, that would be great.
Sure. I think our approach to the question about vehicle occupants who are not the driver came from just, I think, general best practices and the effort to maintain physical distancing, but also from the MED's industry bulletin, I think it's 2003 from last year, where they clarified a really similar question about this regarding curbside service. The MED said that it is appropriate, or it's compliant to make the sale only taking the ID of the driver, but that they would advise against making the sale where it's evident that there are folks in the car under 21. So the way that we interpreted this at our operation was a somewhat case-by-case approach. The scenario that Bia shared, where there's a 3-year-old in the back seat, I'm very comfortable honoring the sale. I think that's exactly the kind of customer who would benefit the most from window service. And that's exactly the kind of scenario that we would want to avoid, someone feeling the need to leave a young child either at home or in a vehicle unattended. So I've cleared my teams to make that sale every time if it's a young child. Where we get a little bit more scrupulous is when the driver and the passengers of the vehicle appear to be really close in age, or there appears to be a situation where someone in the car is purchasing for someone else in the car. I think those situations are hard to, like Molly said, they're really hard to write down, but they're not that hard to see. And so I think we have to make sure people are using good judgment, which is, again, not always easy to do in a systemic way, but the way that we do it is just, if you see any money moving around in the vehicle, that's an immediate deal breaker. We're just not gonna make the sale. And similarly, if you have any question about the age of occupants in the vehicle, it's always okay to card everyone. There's no prohibition on carding extra people. It's just not required. So, so I think, you know, finding a delicate way to include that without excluding folks who might have young kids in the car is going to be the challenge there.
And I feel strongly about making sure that the rule, whatever it is consistent because of situations of profiling. You could use different rules on different people. if there's that flexibility. And that doesn't make me feel very comfortable. So I think whatever it is, I don't think that there should be a lot of flexibility. So if that's a situation, then there shouldn't be a rule about who they can card inside of the car in addition to the driver or the person ordering.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I think the way you phrased that was really, that makes a lot of sense. That by leaving it up to individual judgment, we invite a level of bias that we want to be really careful about not, perpetuating that type of judgment or bias. So yeah, great point. That's something I'll bring to my team as well.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah, this was very helpful. And I think I agree with both of them that in this case, we should leave it open. The reason I brought it up was because Broomfield just, they basically prohibited anyone underage from being inside the car, which I think goes back, to the question of the clients we're trying to serve are maybe exactly those people who can't go inside the stores for whatever reason, like having a child that they can't leave alone. So I just wouldn't want us to close the door on that. But I also do want to be very mindful that it is one of Denver's priorities to, protect youth. So I just want to make sure we balance that.
And this is Kevin Gallagher. I think we should just align with current regulations when it comes to both alcohol and pharmaceutical products, and not necessarily reinvent the wheel.
Agreed.
So quickly before we move on to keep on the previous conversation around the license plate and the video surveillance, one observation we did make too was just making sure that the video is being able to capture the customer, and so I think that could require some additional adding some cameras, but also some additional technology that the camera, sun glare, when it's dark outside, that type of thing, making sure that the cameras are able to capture everything. So, and then making sure that the vehicle, is stopped at a place that either having enough cameras so that no matter where the car stops, that you're still able to capture it, or, making sure that the vehicle stops in the place where the videos can capture the customer. So, thoughts or responses to that? No. Okay. I think we can move on to the next one too, because I think it kind of covers a little bit more about some of the things we were just talking around ID verification. So if you want to move to the next slide, Abby.
Molly, before we move on, can I just tell the group something that I think might be worth knowing? So VSS is pursuing for this session of MED rulemaking to strike the prohibition of vehicles inside the licensed premises to give us a little bit more flexibility of having enclosed structures. We haven't had any opposition so far. So if anybody in this group wants to, co-sign that request to strike that prohibition, we talked a little bit about it with Dominic, and so far we haven't heard anything against it. So just let me know, but I think that's something too that could, impact the rules.
Thanks, Bia. So as far as compliance procedures, I think the main thing that we're trying to get to or think about with this one is probably mostly ID verification. Obviously, you guys are all well informed around the ID requirements within the stores right now. And so making sure that those same ID requirements are upheld in a drive-through or a walk-up window. So any additional ideas around ID verification, whether that be, requiring ID scanners, which are going to be a requirement for delivery, or the timing of the ID request. In stores, you'll stop at the desk before going in and talking to at the point of sale. And so we did notice that the drive-through that we went to, that the very first thing that happened was before, there was talking about an order or anything like that, the very first thing that happened was requesting the ID. And then another thing that we talked about is just outdoor advertising requirements. Not necessarily something we need to put in rule, but just something to be aware of with the drive-through or the walk-up window, that there will, compliance with any outdoor advertising requirements will need to be upheld as well. So, and any other ideas, these were just, again, our initial thoughts brainstorming. So open to other ideas or concerns to address compliance. Anybody?
Well, I think it makes sense from a time perspective to check the ID immediately, right? I don't want to have my bud tender waste their time with someone, get to the sale, and then find out that they're underage. So I don't know that necessarily has to be a requirement, because any good business person would make that happen anyway. But we always use scanners. That's the best way to determine the validity of an ID. So I don't have a problem with that requirement.
Especially the ID scanner is a great idea. Because what we always use is when they come through initially at the front, we check an ID. When they get through and they're dealing with a bud tender, we double check. I think the scanner would, it's not a double check, but at least you're verifying that it's a legitimate ID with the scanner, given the fact that you're not going to be in a position to do the double check like we do with walk-in clients. So I like the idea of the ID scanner quite a bit.
Okay. All right. So, oh yeah.
Sorry, Kevin Gallagher. If there's going to be a requirement for an ID scanner, I would request that there would be some language in there that a licensee could also use. And I don't know the formal title of this, but you'll notice that in the marijuana code, when you look at ID verifications, it gives a list of various examples of additional ID verification systems. So besides an ID scanner, there are also official ID books. So let's say maybe an ID scanner breaks or kind of just craps out, that a licensee would be able to revert to that kind of official ID book as well. Thanks.
Sure.
I'll just piggybacking on that. I mean, the fact is that when you have passports or military IDs, an ID scanner is not able to scan those. So requiring an ID scanner for those other forms of ID, I don't think is appropriate.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Good.
All right. So we can move on to the last one, and then feel free to jump back to any of the other ones before we close. But the last discussion topic and the last area for possible rules is around signage and what should be required or allowed for drive-up and walk-up windows. So some ideas that we're throwing out there is just some signage around, also, again, stating that you have to be 21 or older to purchase marijuana. Something about, using marijuana while driving or being intoxicated or under the influence while driving. And then also, to address the item about, other people in the car being under 21. Also, something about, providing marijuana to anybody under 21 or selling it to anybody under 21 as well. So thoughts on those suggestions or any other additional ideas?
We are okay with all
the
signages, Molly.
Yeah, all that signage seems pretty standard, and it's always good to kind of make sure you have it on in the area of where everything is going to be at in terms of the drive-through. Just kind of make sure you have it uh, spacing on the word I'm looking for, but I definitely think this is all good to go.
You're gonna add something, Abby?
I was just gonna note that for the one that's you must be 21 or older to purchase marijuana, obviously that's you can be 18 or older for medical, so that would be adjusted for medical. But so
All
on
right.
the topic of driving under the influence of marijuana, we had a question on, or just a brainstorming thought about what to do if an intoxicated driver comes through your drive-through. I don't know that we have, really thought through all of that, but we just wanted to bring it to the group and see what initial thoughts were about, if there should be any requirements for what to do if that happens. I think the unique thing about drive-throughs is that when people walk into a store and then they buy something and leave, you don't know if they're going to go smoke in the parking lot and then drive home. But when they pull up to your drive-through and they might already be intoxicated and you see that they're in a car, you now know that they're driving under the influence. And so drive-throughs sort of bring that knowledge of what you didn't know was happening outside of the store. So I think we want to be sensitive to that and see what sort of requirements we might need for that.
Abby, this is Joe Sandoval again. I think it's twofold. I mean, you don't serve visibly intoxicated people or anyway, whether it's under the influence of alcohol and or marijuana. So the sale itself would be refused. I think the question is, once you know they're driving away intoxicated, do we want to inundate law enforcement with calls saying, I don't think law enforcement really wants to get those calls. But I mean, what happens at a Taco Bell? Probably the same thing. They probably call if someone's intoxicated. So I don't know if we need language for that rule specifically.
Yeah, I think that's something that should be resolved through businesses SOPs. Just I agree with Joe that, trying to put that in writing and it's going to open so much liability for both DPD and the businesses, I think.
So something we haven't, we've mentioned it with all of these and it's underlying, but I think we're focusing a lot on the drive-through and the drive-up ones, but these rules will be required of walk-up windows too. So just wanted to put that out there, allow for all the safety and security requirements that we're talking about, making sure that we're keeping the safety of the customer in mind too. The customer may be more vulnerable with product and walking away from it at a walk-up window, perhaps, that definitely more than a drive-up window, but just thinking through that as well too. We talked at the last session about how marijuana businesses are a highly burglarized business. They're also, it's more common for somebody to be robbed walking away from a marijuana business than other types of businesses as well. So making sure that we're thinking through the safety of the customer as well, I think is on the top of our minds. We mentioned that earlier, but just wanted to highlight that in the context of walk-up windows and not just drive-up windows.
Really good point.
All right. We can move into public comment unless anybody else wants to jump in. We'll just say now, if anybody does have any public comment, you can use the raise hand feature, and we'll move you from being an attendee into a panelist for 2 minutes to provide your public comment. So go ahead and use the raise hand feature, and we will do that. If you don't want to provide public comment today, but you have something you'd like to share, you can always provide written comment to us. That applies to both the public and the work group members today. Feel free to send us in written comment if something comes up later, or you want to summarize your thoughts somehow, and that's both on the topic of discussion today and the one from the previous meeting around safe storage. So those can be emailed to marijuanainfo@denvergov.org.
Logan
like he did
raised
have
his
a hand up. Who was
Logan,
it?
Logan
Oh,
Gould's
Logan.
be a panelist now. Logan, you might need to unmute yourself.
Yep, there we go. Hi, Logan Goolsby, Euflora. I just want to bring up with this underage discussion as well, just because there's a 15, 16, 17-year-old in the vehicle does not mean that marijuana is being purchased directly for them. That underage child might actually be disabled or have some sort of handicap that would be similar to keeping a 3-year-old in the car as well. I mean, we can't just say it's your age alone that would restrict any sales. There's a numerous number of factors that go to why an individual might be in a car with a parent or a guardian. You know, the guardian might even be buying the medication for that child as well. And then I just want to, you know, kind of throw this out to the group. Why do we consider marijuana more dangerous than guns? Marijuana has to be in child-proof containers, and guns don't have to have child, you know, resistant locks. So I just continue to think about that. I know that's off topic, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Logan.
Definitely worth bringing up.
All right. Anybody else out there, Abby, signed up for or raising their hand for public comment?
Yes.
Oh, Truman.
Raised. Oh, Truman. Truman Bradley, I'm promoting you to a panelist.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Truman Bradley, Marijuana Industry Group. Thank you so much to everybody, to the panelists, as well as to EXL, DPD, and all of the groups within the city. I think the common theme here that I've heard throughout both of these work groups is a desire to treat cannabis the same as alcohol and pharmaceuticals, and to not impose an additional burden on cannabis. And I would support that and ask the city to keep that in mind. This industry has a really, really strong track record of compliance and respect for public safety. A number of the rules and regs out there go above and beyond the aforementioned other industries. And so I think we're good in that area. I think, you know, as it pertains to crime, most of the crime that I've heard about happens after hours when no one's there. I think if you look at the number of burglaries, you know, i.e. during the day, that's actually pretty rare. And so, you know, that may happen, but I think it's pretty unlikely to happen. And so just want to keep that in mind, you know, and not conflate the two. So anyway, that's it. MIG would support the signage that's been listed. I think all of those make a ton of sense. I would encourage licensees to capture the license plate data, not just for any kind of issues that might happen at the drive-through during, you know, the time of operation, but also if somebody pulls through after hours. Because that seems to be the bigger issue there, but I'm not sure that it needs to be compulsory. Anyway, thank you very much, and appreciate all the hard work.
Great. Thanks, Truman.
Okay. If anyone else wants to make a comment, please feel free to raise your hand. Not seeing any other hands raised.
All right. So then I guess we can go to the final slide and give everybody plenty of time back in their day. And just a reminder of what next steps are. We'll be drafting these rules. We'll be taking everything that we discussed here today, as well as at the last session. and incorporating that into some rules. And there will be a public hearing as a part of that. So I would anticipate probably sometime during July or August, us putting out a draft of those rules and notifying everybody about the timing of that hearing. So keep an eye out for that. If the way that that will be communicated is through our information bulletin. So the link is there and we can put that in the chat as well to sign up for the bulletin if you're not already, but that will be the best way to hear about when that hearing is scheduled and to get a link to the copy of the draft rules. So we look forward to hearing your feedback once those rules are out there, and then continuing to work with everybody. So again, feel free to reach out if you have anything that you thought of that we didn't discuss here today. You know, we can't think of everything and we're not out there every day. And so really appreciate and value your feedback. It's important to us that we hear from you and from everybody. So feel free to contact us if you have any additional thoughts. Anything else
Thank
to
you.
add, Abby? Yeah.
Nope, thanks, everybody.
Thanks for sure. This is
All right.
awesome, as always.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.